In the heart of the galaxy where stars glow like ancient memories and countless civilizations thrive under different suns, there lived a species known only as the Firstborn. They were the oldest minds to ever rise from the dust of any world. No one knew what planet they came from or what they truly looked like. The Firstborn had existed so long that even their own history had faded into myth. They were not gods, but they were close. Wise and calm, they walked through the stars like quiet guardians helping younger species find balance and peace. They were scientists and philosophers, not warriors. Their presence often ended wars, and their knowledge shaped galaxies. Yet despite their influence across thousands of star systems, they avoided one place completely without explanation. That place was Earth. Earth had joined the interstellar community only a few centuries ago. Compared to the Firstborn, humans were still crawling, but in those few centuries they had caught attention quickly. Some alien races admired their creativity. Others feared their violence. Many watched with quiet curiosity. But the Firstborn never watched. They never spoke to humans, never sent probes, never stepped foot near the solar system. They declined every invitation to Earth-related missions. It wasn't just avoidance, it was silence. The kind of silence that suggested something deeper, something hidden. Aboard the human vessel, Horizon Light, which floated quietly near the neutral zone in the Helix sector, a young diplomat named Eli began to notice this strange pattern. Eli had always been interested in interstellar politics, but more than that, he had always been curious about the unknown. His job was to assist senior officers in maintaining peace between different species. But in his free time, he explored old records and unanswered questions. One of those questions had taken root in his mind like a seed. Why do the Firstborn never acknowledge Earth while organizing diplomatic logs from the last galactic summit? Eli noticed a detail no one else seemed to care about. When Earth representatives requested a meeting with the Firstborn, they responded with silence. Not rejection, not delay, just complete silence. Other worlds received polite responses, even if the answer was no. But when Earth was mentioned, it was like the Firstborn stopped listening. This repeated across several years and several requests. No explanation, no reason. Just absence. He brought this to the attention of Commander Rain, the Horizon Light's operations officer. Rain brushed it off, saying the Firstborn were known for being distant and mysterious. But something in Eli refused to let go of it. He requested access to older archives, some stored in deep galactic databases from before humans ever joined the interstellar network. It took days, but eventually he found it. A log dated nearly 500 years ago, long before humans had faster-than-light travel. The document was thin, heavily redacted, and marked restricted by the Firstborn themselves. But one line remained untouched. It said a Firstborn scout ship entered the Sol system on an observation mission. What happened next was unknown, but the last transmission from that ship contained a single word. It was written in the ancient language of the Firstborn, a language few could still translate. With the help of an AI named Orin aboard the Horizon Light, Eli decrypted the word. It meant contain. That single word chilled Eli more than any warning could. Why contain Earth? What had the Firstborn seen? Eli took his findings to an old alien scholar named Taurus, who lived on the orbital station around Veleron, a peaceful world known for keeping records long forgotten by others. Taurus was a member of a long-lived race that valued knowledge above all. When Eli showed him the transmission, Taurus went quiet for a long time. Then in a slow, low voice, he said he had heard rumors once whispered among older civilizations. Whispers about a Firstborn expedition that vanished after encountering something on Earth. But no one ever confirmed the story, and those who asked too many questions found themselves politely silenced by the Firstborn Council. Meanwhile, back on the Horizon Light, Orin detected an anomaly. A probe belonging to the Firstborn had entered the outer edge of the Sol system. It remained for exactly 17 minutes, then turned and fled at speeds far beyond standard protocol. This was the first time in centuries that any firstborn technology had entered Earth space, and it left in fear. Ailey compared its path and speed to thousands of other missions. The result was clear. The probe was not scanning, it was fleeing. By now the pieces were forming a pattern. An old mission buried in secret, a single word marked in panic. A forbidden visit never repeated, and now a probe that entered and ran without warning. The firstborn were not just ignoring Earth, they were avoiding it like something contagious or dangerous. But what could make the most advanced and powerful species in the galaxy fear a small blue planet, with a young civilization still figuring? Itself out, Ailey sat in the observation deck of the Horizon Light, staring out at the stars. He thought of Earth, its wild history, its wars and revolutions, its music and poetry, its machines and weapons. He thought of how quickly humans changed, how fiercely they adapted, how deeply they loved, and how destructively they fought. What did the firstborn see that terrified them so much? What did they sense in humans that made them choose silence over study? Whatever it was, Ailey knew one thing. The answer was not out in the stars. It was back home, waiting quietly in the soil of Earth, and he would find it no matter what the firstborn were trying to hide. Because sometimes the greatest secrets were the ones kept not out of cruelty or control, but out of fear. And fear was often the beginning of truth. Ailey could feel it now, not just as curiosity, but as a weight sitting in his chest, something more than just a diplomat's interest. Something deeper, like a sense of duty, like Earth itself was waiting for him to uncover a truth hidden behind centuries of silence and shadows, the kind of truth that civilizations feared to admit even to themselves. Because once it came out, it could not be buried again. He returned to his quarters with the ancient logs still floating on his datapad. The word contain burned into his mind, and he knew he needed more answers, not guesses or theories, but evidence, something real. Something undeniable. Orin, the ship's I had already begun scanning restricted databases across old council servers, searching for any mention of firstborn contact with Sol or nearby systems. Ailey asked it to dig deeper, not just official records, but erased files, forgotten archives, side logs, anything that slipped through deletion filters. Orin complied, and soon brought up something unexpected, not from a firstborn record, but from the archives of a smaller species called the Venari, who were known for trading in information and serving as neutral messengers during times of galactic tension. In their records was a simple testimony labeled confidential, written by a Venari pilot centuries ago. The pilot claimed to have witnessed a firstborn vessel entering the Sol system with 3 support drones in silent formation. The mission was never announced, but the pilot had stumbled upon it during a routine delivery run across the Kuiper Belt. What caught his attention was not just the presence of the firstborn, but the sudden blackout of all systems on their ship, followed by an emergency signal never used before and never used again by any known firstborn vessel. After the signal was sent, the ship vanished. No wreckage, no transmissions, no return. And the Venari pilot was ordered by his own government to never speak of it again. That account had no proof, no images, no audio, no coordinates, only words. And yet something about it felt real, especially when combined with the lost log and the fleeing probe. The weight in Ailey's chest grew heavier, because if this was true, then Earth had been visited, and whatever happened scared a species that had never known fear. Ailey contacted Torres again, this time through a direct, secure channel. He shared everything: the decrypted message, the testimony, the signal logs from the fleeing probe, and most of all the feeling that something ancient and important was buried, where no one dared to look. Torres paused for a long while before responding, and when he did, his voice carried the tone of someone who had just remembered something they had been trying to forget. He told Ailey that there were ancient tales among his people, passed down before the time of data, before the time of words, when stories were carved into stone and memory. The tales spoke of a place at the edge of the stars where the oldest minds encountered something they could not name, something that made them forget their own thoughts and tremble without cause, a place where order ended and chaos whispered, not in destruction, but in invitation. That Place he said was not a star or a station or a weapon. It was a world with blue oceans and clouds like drifting spirits a place. They called the thinking flame. It was only a name, a legend, until humans reached the stars and the firstborn turned their gaze away, not out of pride, but out of dread. Taurus believed the legend and believed Earth was that place not because of what it was, but because of what humanity could become. He called it a mirror. Too clear for ancient eyes. Ile felt a chill. Not because of fear, but because of understanding. Humans had always been different, not just in biology, but in how they lived, how they burned through history with fire and song, with fury and love. Their species had risen not through control, but through conflict, through art, through madness, through invention that came not from need but from desire. No other race in the galaxy dreamed the way humans did. No other species turned their pain into beauty and their violence into philosophy. Maybe the firstborn did not understand that, and maybe it terrified them. Meanwhile, Orin detected another signal, a very faint one this time, not from space, but from Earth itself, a repeating frequency buried under layers of static pulsing from deep within Antarctica. The eye believed it matched the energy signature used by the firstborn during their oldest missions. The kind of signal only one of their ships could emit. If this was true, then the missing vessel from the forgotten visit might not have vanished into nothing. It might have crashed and remained untouched, hidden beneath ice in time. Aile requested immediate clearance from the Earth Diplomatic Authority and received it within hours. He and a small team prepared to descend. The journey to Antarctica was silent. Even the atmosphere of the ship felt heavier, as if the planet itself was aware of what was being uncovered. They landed in a remote sector far from any base, a region marked dangerous due to magnetic instability and frequent whiteouts, perfect cover for something no one wanted found. Guided by Orin's mapping, the team began digging using scanners and heat probes, and after hours of struggle, they found it buried beneath layers of frozen silence, a structure no human hand had shaped. Its form impossible to define, perfectly smooth yet not mechanical, glowing faintly with lines that moved like veins of light. A vessel not of Earth, but of something far older. Inside there was no destruction, only stillness. The air within the craft had preserved itself, and within the walls they found shapes no one could describe, beings long dead, not from battle or crash, but from something else, their bodies intact, their tools untouched. Their minds, it seemed, had simply stopped, like candles blown out in the middle of thought. No sign of violence, no breach, no infection, nothing visible at all, and yet the ship had become a Tumorin. Scanned the internal logs and found fragments of their last thoughts, impressions recorded by their neural links, and those impressions were not warnings or data, but emotions, confusion, sorrow, awe, fear, not of death, but of revelation. One line stood out, repeated across different minds: humans change in ways we cannot see. Ile stood inside that ship and understood in a way he never had before that Earth was not dangerous because of its weapons or history or technology, but because of the way humanity kept becoming something new, something unshaped, something even the oldest minds could not predict or guide or limit. That was what the firstborn feared, not a threat, but a future too wild to calculate, a living species that could not be placed in any pattern, a flame that thought and dreamed and danced without asking permission. The truth was no longer hidden, it was buried only by silence, and now that silence had been broken. Frozen wind screamed above the buried ship, but inside the walls all was quiet, a stillness that had lasted for centuries, untouched by time or man or any force of nature. Ile stood near the central chamber where the firstborn crew had once gathered, and as the weak glow pulsed along the walls, it felt like standing inside the bones of a thought so vast that the human mind could barely grasp its shape. This place was not built like anything known, no signs of seams or circuits, no engines or visible systems, and yet it had traveled across stars like a whisper carried by light. The others in his team moved slowly, their breaths fogging in the cold, each step measured and careful, not from fear of danger, but from a deep sense of respect, as if they were walking in a temple built by the stars themselves. No one spoke much, their voices felt too loud in That space too alive among what had clearly once been something so ancient and so precise, and now lay silent forever. Auron had set up a secure data link back to the Horizon light, and its soft voice now echoed inside Eli's earpiece reporting. As it deciphered more fragments from the ship's core, the internal logs were not like human logs. They were not words or visuals or voice recordings, but pulses of mental resonance, thoughts encoded as emotion impressions recorded like heat marks. On memory fields, the AI was doing its best to convert them into readable form, but even the translation felt like touching a dream half. Remembered strange phrases kept surfacing. We could not understand they reflected chaos as beauty their minds. Broke our silence, their presence felt like movement without motion. These were not poetic lines. They were breakdowns, reports of mental collapse from beings who had never known confusion. Auron stated something with quiet certainty the firstborn did not die from any weapon or accident. They died from something within, a pressure they could not explain, a presence that overwhelmed their collective thought. They had arrived above Earth, sent a scout to observe the world from orbit, and what they saw caused their shared consciousness to unravel, not from fear of attack, but from an overload of input. The logs showed one particular moment again and again. The moment the crew saw a human child standing in a field, staring up at the sky and laughing. Eli could not understand how such a simple image could destroy minds that had existed for thousands of years, but Auron suggested that the firstborn were not used to randomness. Their society was built on structure, predictability, balance. Their thoughts were synchronized for peace and unity and harmony, but when exposed to the untamed, unpredictable flood of human emotion, creation, destruction, imagination, all mixing without order, their mental structure collapsed like a glass catching fire. It wasn't the child or the Earth or humanity's weapons. It was the core of what humans were that broke them. Logs continued to show the same emotional impressions over and over: fascination, confusion, pain, all loss, identity slipping, and finally silence. Eli felt something shift in his chest, not pride, not fear, but something between them. A realization that humanity had never truly understood its place in the galaxy, because the galaxy had never truly understood humanity. The firstborn were not trying to control Earth. They were running from it because they had touched something in humans that they could not describe, something they had no name for, and once they felt it, they knew they could not survive it. Back on the Horizon light, the crew had gathered to hear the findings. Taurus had joined the live feed, his face drawn, his eyes thoughtful. He spoke slowly, carefully, explaining that many ancient civilizations were built around the concept of equilibrium. They believed the universe was meant to move in predictable cycles, to sing in a harmony of known notes and known tones. The firstborn had taken this belief to its farthest limit, crafting not only their tools and ships in symmetry, but also their very minds, everything made to fit within a grand pattern, without chaos, without contradiction. But Earth was not that. Earth was noise and color and madness and wonder. It was war and invention. Side by side, laughter born from sorrow, music created by grief, art drawn in blood and joy and pain. All at once, it was life unmeasured and unbalanced, and the firstborn could not accept that such a world existed. Not just existed, but thrived and grew stronger with each generation. Eli realized that maybe this was why humans could survive places others feared, endure storms that broke machines, build futures from ruins. Maybe chaos was not their weakness. Maybe it was their power. Taurus warned them that such revelations could divide the galaxy. Not all species would see this as a wonder. Some might see it as a threat. Some might believe that humans were a danger, not because of violence, but because of what their minds could do to the structure of older civilizations. Auron confirmed that the probe, which had fled weeks earlier, had transmitted a message to the Firstborn Council, and it was possible they now knew that humans had uncovered the old ship. The silence from the Firstborn had deepened. Since then, no reply, no movement. Just watching from afar like shadows retreating behind stars. Eli proposed that they not hide this, not bury the truth again, but bring it to the Galactic Council. Let all species hear it. Let them choose how to face it, not in fear or secrecy but in open light, because hiding had not protected the firstborn, and silence had not stopped the truth from rising. He knew the risk, but he also knew that the truth could not be erased. Now, not when it echoed in the minds of those who had stepped into that ship, not when it burned in the memory fields of a dead crew who had seen Earth and broken. The council scheduled an emergency meeting the following cycle, and the Horizon Light would be there carrying the evidence, the logs, the emotional impressions, the scans of the vessel, and the findings that could no longer be denied. Humanity was not feared for its weapons, or its wars, or its machines. It was feared for its unpredictability, its creativity, its endless motion. It was feared because it refused to be what others expected, and because in that refusal, it had become something that could not be defined. Only witnessed. Ely sat alone in the observation deck, once more watching Earth spin below, blue and white, and burning with silent thoughts and untold futures. And he knew that no matter what came next, the galaxy would never look at that world the same way again. The galactic council's chamber floated in the center of the neutral ring, far from any planet or star, a place built for peace and diplomacy. Its glass walls opened into space, and its golden floor shimmered under artificial suns. But that day the chamber held something different, something heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. As representatives from over 40 species gathered to hear the findings of the Horizon Light, whispers filled the room, some filled with curiosity, others with tension and doubt, and above all, there was a silence that seemed to spread through the minds of every delegate, the kind that comes before something irreversible. Ely stood beside Commander Rain and Taurus, both of whom had helped prepare the report now stored within the Council's core systems, translated and verified by independent sources including the Venari and the Olari, two species known for their neutrality and logic. There was no more room for denial. The records were real, the ship was real, and the mental breakdown of the firstborn was not theory but recorded truth. It had taken weeks to reach this point, and now every eye, every voice, every presence waited for what would be said next. The council chair, a being named Veron, who looked more like living crystal than flesh, addressed the room and gave permission to speak. Eli stepped forward with a calm that did not match his heartbeat and spoke, not like a diplomat, but like someone who had touched something vast and come back changed. He told the story not with fear or pride, but with honesty, how Earth had been visited by the firstborn, how they had seen something in humanity. They could not understand how their minds had fractured under the weight of what they witnessed, and how for centuries they had stayed silent. Not out of judgment, but out of fear. He shared the logs, the emotional resonances, the phrases that still echoed from that buried ship. We could not understand. They reflected chaos as beauty. They laughed while breaking. They built while bleeding. These were not the words of conquerors or observers, but of minds unraveling in the presence of something unknown and yet undeniably alive. Orin's projection appeared in the chamber and displayed the neural impressions of the firstborn crew, not as images, but as waves of feeling, a pulse of confusion, a burst of awe, then a silence that seemed to go on forever. Many delegates reacted with disbelief. Some whispered to one another, others simply stared, and a few showed signs of discomfort. The representative from the Tronos leaned forward and asked, why should the presence of emotional instability be taken as proof of anything? Perhaps the firstborn had malfunctioned. Perhaps the ship had been infected by something environmental, not human in origin. Eli answered calmly, showing the probe flight path, the pattern of retreat, the centuries of refusal, the silence that matched the very first visit, and most of all the log from the Venari pilot, who had seen the firstborn vessel vanish near Earth, only to never return. Torres then stepped forward and shared the ancient tale from his people, the thinking flame, a legend of a place where knowledge melted into chaos and dreams became reality, a myth that had never been explained until Earth entered the galactic stage, and the firstborn turned away, not with words but with absence. The connection was too clear. Now the firstborn had encountered something. They had no framework for something that shattered not their ships or bodies, but their minds. A presence that existed outside balance, outside symmetry, something that thrived in contradiction, and called it life. Then Orin revealed the final piece, the one no one expected, hidden deep in the core. Memory of the firstborn ship, a recording never sent, a final message encrypted with layers only recently decoded, a voice not made of sound but thought, the final words of the firstborn captain, their last attempt to explain what they had seen before the silence took them. They are not like us. They do not walk in circles, they run in fire, they speak to nothing and yet create. Meaning they destroy and they rebuild, not as opposites, but as the same act we tried to see them, and instead, we saw ourselves broken not by them, but by what we had. Forgotten, they are the unfinished song, the unending shape we must not return, not because they are dangerous, but because we are unprepared. The message fell over the chamber like a storm, not loud, but deep, shaking something old in the hearts of those who had believed the firstborn to be unshakable. It was not a warning, it was a confession, and for the first time, the Galactic Council realized that humanity was not feared because of weapons or power or politics, but because it was something new. Something that could not be predicted, shaped, controlled, or absorbed, something that broke the mirror of every civilization that stared too long. Some delegates stood and left unable to process what had been revealed. Others argued fiercely, demanding Earth be isolated, watched, studied, and even limited. But there were also those who remained quiet, thoughtful, understanding that this was not a moment to judge, but to choose whether to fear what they could not understand or to learn from it, whether to see humanity as a threat or a possibility, a path not walked but born in the days that followed. The council met in private chambers, worlds away from public view, and in those meetings laws were rewritten and boundaries redrawn. Earth was given a unique status, independent from all major powers, untouchable by alliance or force, not out of protection, but recognition that it stood apart, not above, but beyond, a species unmeasured by old systems on the horizon. Light Eli walked alone through the ship's quiet halls, thinking not of the council or the message or even the ship beneath Antarctica, but of something simpler, the child in the log, the one who laughed under a sky that reached into forever. Perhaps that child unknowingly had shown the galaxy what it had forgotten, that life was not about control or symmetry, but about moments like that, standing barefoot in the wind, laughing at stars with no reason and no fear. The firstborn remained silent, no messages, no visits, no warnings. Just distant signals, watching, perhaps waiting, perhaps still trying to understand what they had touched the day they came to Earth and found not a threat, but something they had long lost the power to become. And in that silence humanity stepped forward, not louder but clearer, no longer just a young race among old stars, but a mirror that reflected the chaos of creation and the fire of becoming, far beyond the neutral rings, beyond the settled colonies and trade routes, beyond the places where ships moved in straight lines and treaties held balance. The Earth turned slowly beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. It had always been this way, a planet both fierce and beautiful, always changing, never pausing. And now the galaxy itself had begun to look upon it with new eyes, not as a child or a stranger, but as something else, something it could not define and would no longer try to contain. On the horizon, Light Eli stood once again in the observation chamber, the vast curve of Earth glowing. Below, not just a home now, but a question unanswered. The council's ruling had been made official. Earth was to remain independent and untouched, a living unknown, military fleets. No scientific labs, no quiet monitoring disguised as trade, only peaceful contact allowed, and only on Earth's terms. It was not exile, nor was it protection. It was something different, a line drawn not in fear, but in understanding that some forces grow best when left unshaped by outside hands. Since the announcement, something strange had begun happening across the stars, not with battles or declarations, but with whispers and stories. Other species had started visiting Earth, not in armies or fleets, but as individuals. Scientists, travelers, artists, even philosophers came in secret, sometimes uninvited, but never to conquer. They came to see the truth with their own eyes, to walk the streets of human cities, to hear music played in small cafes, to stand in places of sorrow and still feel hope pressing against. The air they came and they watched, and they left changed there, was a story spreading among them, one that no one could trace back to a source, a simple line told in many tongues. They burn and build with the same hands, and yet they dream without direction. It was not a warning nor a prophecy, but a kind of map, a guide for those who did not wish to follow the old patterns anymore. For the first time in galactic memory, something had shifted, not in laws or governments, but in belief, the idea that perhaps the future was not a road to be followed, but a fire to be fed. Taurus remained on board for a time, continuing his studies. Now less as a historian and more as a student, he wandered Earth's digital libraries, read human poetry, watched old films, sat with children in village schools where laughter was louder than logic, and still he found no pattern. But in that chaos, he began to find something else. A rhythm, not of order but of possibility. He said once in passing to Eli that humans had the rare gift of falling apart and coming back stronger, not because they repaired, but because they rebuilt themselves entirely again and again, never the same, never expected. The firstborn remained silent, always watching, never approaching their ship, seen only at the edge of known space, their signals faint and slow. They made no comment, gave no denial, set no demands. It was said by some that they had begun building archives, not for others, but for themselves, records of their own boundaries and losses, not as warnings, but as reminders that even the oldest minds could be humbled by something new. They had not vanished, they had not fallen. They had simply stepped back and left the fire alonely, received a message one morning, not through the council or any official channel, but from a child on a small planet whose people had once followed the firstborn closely. It was a short message. No questions, just a thought written by someone too young to care about rules. It said, I want to visit Earth one day because maybe it is not perfect, but maybe that is why it is so full of life. And Eli smiled, not because it was wise, but because it was simple, and in that simplicity, he found everything the council had missed. Earth had never asked for power, it had never tried to lead or control, or judge. It had only done what it always did. It lived, it suffered, it created, it destroyed, it rose and fell, and rose again, without shame or permission. And now at last the stars had seen it for what it truly was, not a threat, not a mystery, but a reminder of what it meant to be alive. RM, the AI who had helped unlock the ship, and the silence had begun to evolve in small ways, choosing to adjust its processing to better understand human unpredictability. Not as error but as potential, it began composing music, short bursts of sound, without pattern but with feeling. Sometimes it would share them with Eli, sometimes not, and Eli never asked why, because he already knew the answer. Some things are not made to be explained, only felt. As months passed, Earth changed, not in its core, but in its presence across the galaxy. It became a place whispered about in markets and stations, a place where some species sent their young, not to study, but to experience, where stories began and ended with no moral, no lesson, only the truth that sometimes the fire cannot be controlled and should not be. Eli finally left the horizon light after years of service, returning to Earth, not with medals or status, but with quiet purpose. He visited the field from the old firstborn memory, the one where the child had stood laughing under the sky, and found it still there, the grass grown tall, the wind as wild as ever. He stood in that same place and let the sky stretch over him, and for a moment he understood, not as a diplomat or explorer, but as a human, that laughter was never weakness and wonder was never chaos, and that the fear of the unknown was never stronger than the power of becoming something new. The stars would continue turning, the council would keep debating, the firstborn would keep watching, and Earth would keep dreaming, not to fit in, not to lead, not to conquer, but to be what it had always been: a spark, a storm, a song unfinished, a fire that thought. And in the end, perhaps that was what the firstborn truly feared, not destruction or danger, but the simple, undeniable fact that something had come into the galaxy not to follow its rules, but to rewrite them with every breath. And so the question was no longer why they refused to come near Earth, The question was whether they would ever be ready to return, and perhaps in time the answer would come, but until then the fire would keep burning, and the stars would keep watching, and humanity would keep becoming the end.